You can't replace part of the brain. Like, you
treat them the same.
A source of truth for the medtech industry.
Coexists with the province.
Robot understands things automatically.
Number one show in the medtech industry.
So Stryker got ahead of that and changed in the 90s, built $1 billion company that held up high, a lot of things.
State of MedTech.
With your host, Omar and Khatib.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Today's guest came on the show in a very interesting way and exciting way. So our guest today is Bjorn von Siemens, who's the founder of Caresytnax. Many of you know them as a really exciting precision surgery company at the forefront of surgical precision and data. The way this came about, though, is that I've of course known Bjorn for a number of years. We've been connected on LinkedIn. And he came on my radar recently because he pleasantly surprised me. One of the best things that ever happens is when I find out about people looking at old episodes of my show. And so on Instagram, I got a notification somebody was mentioning me in the show, and it was Bjorn who was listening to the Jim Alexi episode, I think, from the Intuitive years and talking about how great it was. So, of course, I reached out to him. He's a very busy guy, but we were able to make it work. So, Bjorn, thank you so much for coming on the show. How are you doing?
Pleasure to be here, and yeah, thank you for reaching out.
Absolutely. And you know, the show has a history of having great German founders and CEOs on the show. My first one was Stefan Wilschmeyer. His episode turned out very well. I became very big in Germany, but I think this episode's going to outdo that one. You know,
That's a high mark. But we're going to do our best.
Fantastic. Well, Bjorn, you know, before we jump into Caresytnax and a lot of exciting news coming out of there, you have a very interesting and fascinating history in the industry. So maybe if you could tell us, one, like your descendancies, who you're related to, but also like how did you get into medtech? You know, we had a great conversation before we started, so can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think as always, there's so many factors that play a role in the reason why we are where we are, where I am where I am. One of my forefathers founded Siemens. So we had, we grew up in this, I guess, entrepreneurially driven environment. And that was very interesting because conversely to other German families and let's say culture in general, risk was seen as something more positive. And, you know, the risk taking that the first generation took in the 19th century in 1842, 1847, when they founded the company and, you know, created these technologies and let's say put telegraphing lines throughout the ocean were very, very high and led to transformational improvements and results. And I think that was something that, just left a big imprint in my youth. And the other part was from my mother's side, there's actually a lot of physicians and also, I would say, surgeons in the family. And so I grew up around the stories of intensive care units taking care of patients and how motivating and how rewarding that is. And that actually made me pursue a career in medicine, and it made it almost no option to go anywhere else, I would say. So, not without overplaying the legacy part, I'd say that a lot of it is driven obviously by genetics and by the environment someone grows up in. And for me, entrepreneurship and healthcare were kind of set. And even though I tried other things, I did fail. And it wasn't fun being in the corporate world and private equity world, or let's say in academic research. So I found myself after 10 years of doing that in the entrepreneurial and the tech entrepreneurial world. And that really started in the US, actually, in a stint that I had there for multiple years between West and East Coast. And I love the ecosystem and still spend a lot of time there. Very positive energy.
That's fantastic. And so, you know, when you founded Caresytnax, you founded it over a decade ago. And so you've been really focused on defining this category of precision surgery. How did the idea of Caresytnax come about?
The idea was born in looking at different subsectors of healthcare and doing a top-down analysis on where digitalization can drive the most impact in terms of efficiencies, in terms of costs, and where it's also least adopted. And interestingly, when we found surgery, after 10 years not having been in an operating room myself, I went in there and I saw that all these high-tech systems that are used to treat and monitor the patient are still not connected. And even though, the surgeons are doing very, very sophisticated procedures, they're still driven by the manual dexterity and by the experience of the surgeon. And that is very interesting. And that was the case in 2010, and that was the case in 2020, and it is still the case today in most environments. And the reason for that is really, the reason for the existence of Surgical AI, which was our holding company, which we founded in 2010 with some capital that we made ourselves beforehand, but also basically as a birthing or as a birthplace for Caresytnax as a company. And that was a genesis. And I think there's always a lot of reasons, also personal ones. Of course, it was interesting to see that both co-founders of mine and myself, we did have affinity to surgery beforehand. And that makes it easier emotionally, I think, to take the leap of faith and the jump into going into an area which has extremely scarily high, actually, barriers to entry. So everybody you talk to go into surgery as an entrepreneur and who knows about it tells you you're, close to probably, clinically being on the spectrum or something like this of craziness. But we found it to be, in a way, natural, but also attractive because of its scale and size and because of the impact you can have.
No, I agree. And, there's something about surgical technology that, like, I romanticize that. I started my career in it. It's really, really difficult, but it's something very quite, exciting about it. Aside from the scale and everything, at least from your earlier years, I know that you interned actually at Siemens when you started your career. Was there something specific about surgery that drew you towards it more than, say, some of these other areas like therapeutics and diagnostics?
Quick commercial break for marketing leaders and sales leaders. I don't have to tell you this, but it's worth reiterating that the time clinicians have to meet with medical reps is limited. You know this and feel this. It's been a challenge for med device sellers for decades. Now, with the rising workloads and patient care demands, clinicians' times are shrinking even more. And the window for your sellers and your sales team to meet with these clinicians consists of pretty much just minutes in a busy hospital hallway. The reality is your sellers have to make every second count or someone else will. They must be concise, they got to be efficient, and use highly relevant information to make the most out of these brief interactions. ShowPad is all about focusing your sellers on the art of selling, which is about building trust and relationships. And while there's science, the ShowPad solution handles the behind-the-scenes prep and follow-up work to make your team more effective. The best part is that you get insights on content and training performance so you can make strategic decisions and invest more in what works based on data. ShowPad helps your sales and marketing teams spend their time in more productive, high-impact ways with a multiplying effect on your revenue results and growing your pipeline. So to learn more, go to showpad.com/State of MedTech. Now, let's get back to the show.
Yeah, I would say that it's a place in which really a human life is decided in one way or another. A very positive event in many cases. There's 500 million surgeries every year being done today, 2 billion actually minor interventions on this planet. And so I think there's something very special about the operating room itself. It's actually the historic reason also for the existence of a hospital is this operating theater and the sterile environment and the intensive care unit and so on. That's where hospitals were built around. So it's a very special place. The patient is not conscious, and in most cases, right? And the team is taking care of a very critical intervention, which is usually designed to prolong the life of the patient significantly or change the life of the patient, the quality of the life of the patient significantly in a positive way. And I think that is just a very high acuity, high intensity environment. And that is very fascinating. And anybody that's been into an operating block and into operating rooms, and I spend a lot of time in there, know how it feels like. It's really one of these quite magical places where, every movement is choreographed and everything, every little step and every little detail matters. And that is fascinating. And that is, I guess what drives a lot of people to it, just from a technological and technique perspective.
Understood. Yeah, and it's interesting that you put it that way. But yeah, I think that's one thing that's often lost and forgotten, which is that hospitals really were born out of this idea of a surgical theater being sort of central to the hospital. I want to go back though to your history real quick, because I know that you're managing director over at Surgical AI. You guys invest in a lot of AI and robotics, but there had to have been a moment. I want you to think back in your memory. There was a moment that you're investing in companies and everything. Going and being a founder is not an easy thing. It's actually it's a kind of a crazy thing, because it's an amount of stress and like it's crazy. If anybody who's curious about it, go look up Elon Musk's famous I think answer at YC or something, which was like he described it as like staring into the void and like shoving shards of glass in your eye. So what was the moment that kind of motivated you to say like, yeah, you know what, I want to start a company. I want to build a platform around bringing efficiency and intelligence to the OR. What was that day? Can you think back to that? Because there had to have been a specific thing, specific emotion you felt.
Yeah, I think it was really, there were two things that I realized. One is what I'm good at and what I'm not good at. And because we started from this more investing angle, I realized I'm not a great investor. And the reason is because I get very excited and motivated around technologies and entrepreneurs. And I got so excited and motivated that I basically would want to, let's say, at least in healthcare, medtech, and biotech, invest in most people and most technologies that are around, because I just get excited about the patient impact and what it could become. And that is not what a disciplined, good investor should do. And that's one. And two is, as an investor, you're sitting in the second row. You're basically on the board, or you're, influencing and supporting, but really being out there and talking to the surgeons and the hospital staff and the nurses and the patients and the hospital directors, and now also the insurance companies, reinsurance companies and medical device companies. I met a lot of extremely motivated, very driven, very intelligent, and I would say, intrinsically inspiring people. And because I was in, the second decade of my career, I already had made a lot of experience around the people and that I wanted to be around and the people that I didn't want to be around. And so ultimately it was a choice of what can I really do very well, or what can I be really world-class at. And I think that's fundamentally a very good reason. And that's what we got taught in our US education. Let's say, pick something that you really think you can be extremely good at and that you enjoy at the same time. And that is entrepreneurship, in a sense of bringing something to the market, building an institution, bringing an innovation to the market, convincing people, motivating people and investors to join, and then working with people that have positive values and are very hardworking and that have this spirit of, let's say, innovation entrepreneurship. And interestingly, I find that surgeons have that a lot. So a lot of surgeons are extremely innovation centric and research driven, and they are working extremely hard. They're getting up at 5 a.m. in the morning. They have their clinic, they have surgery, they're going through the day, and then they're taking care of patients and families afterwards in terms of communication. So they're some of the hardest working people that I that I've met in my career, which included, financial services and the hedge funds and so on. So I think, that's just a great environment to be in, and to be surrounded by people that embody these values and this work ethic, and that moves things forward, and that has moved things forward. Of course, not as fast as we wanted to, and there are a lot of hurdles, and it's a very, very hard path. I'd say it's similar to how Elon Musk described it. I mean, we're not in e-commerce or not in the internet industry where you can create a company overnight. That just doesn't happen in surgery. In surgery, everything takes 10 years. Otherwise, it's basically not possible to do something truly new, even if you do it in a way that we did, which was semi-acquisitive and, kind of buy and build. But if you really want to make an imprint, you have to be around, become a trusted partner, and then kind of scale from that base. So it takes much longer than a lot of other, let's say, tech subsectors in which you can grow much faster. But the personal and, let's say, the motivational reward, also the financial reward at the end of the day, I think outweighs these early 7 to 10 years that you have to go through, which are very, very painful, and takes a lot to gain the respect of surgical staff and teams and departments, and for the right reasons, because they know they have the responsibility for the life of a patient.
Of course. And I just got to comment that it's a very self-aware thing. What you described earlier, that you just realize you're not a good investor. I think you might be the first person I met who was an investor and realized, like, oh, I'm actually not good at this. I should be a founder. So I think that's really admirable. Why do you think you're like that? Do you feel like you've always been that way, to be like that self-reflectant, or was there something in your education, maybe a mentor, that helped you become that way?
There were mentors, and there was inspiration in the family, and including, I think, part of my research in my research day, let's say, was about entrepreneurial history and about entrepreneurship overall. And I read a lot of our family's history, but also other founders throughout the years. And I think those became mentors, even though potentially they're no longer around us. But I just read a lot of primary, let's say, autobiography or biographic materials or letters they wrote to each other. And that was one side. And they were also very instrumental mentors that have been on our boards or around us. And they just, in conversations, when you ask for feedback, they give it to you. And that's, it just transpired that let's say, the bias towards action and the bias towards doing things is not a great bias if you're an investor. And unless you're really like an activist investor, maybe a trader or something like this, but I wasn't that either. So I think, being a VC investor or PE investor or long-term investor, you sit there and you see, let's say the archetype Warren Buffett, somebody that is just even keeled and thinks about, 20 horizon, and then makes their decisions. And, it could be any day of the week, so to say. And that is the opposite on this, let's say, personality spectrum from an entrepreneur, where it's very value accretive to be action oriented. And it's actually, I think Reid Hoffman said, basically entrepreneurship is you jump off a cliff and you have to build a plane while you fall. So any moment you don't spend on action, but on thinking, brings you closer to the ground, so to say. So you have to kind of keep on moving and keep acting. And I think that's a little bit of a maybe extreme morbid example of how to depict entrepreneurship. But the bias for action is there and was there. And I liked that when I was very young already, I guess, and I still love it. It's a personality trait thing. It's not something that I think you can, you can agree, come up with that.
No, I completely agree. As an entrepreneur myself now and a small business owner, I can absolutely agree that taking action is much more important than thinking. I agree with you. I think the other thing that you said is I agree with is that entrepreneurship is not for everything. It's a personality thing. I think as much as I love the United States, I love living here as an American. I have a son now, and who I
Congratulations.
yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah, and I can hear him. He's 2 years old, and he's already playing with robots. We had to buy him his own Roomba because he broke ours. But I think that sometimes here in the United States, entrepreneurship is promoted almost too much, and I don't think everybody can be an entrepreneur. There's some great people. I mean, look at Steve Ballmer. He's the 10th richest man in the world. He was an employee. And so I think this is something that's absolutely a personality. You can't. I think you can become an entrepreneur, but it's definitely not for everybody. You gotta like the pain and being able to fall. I always tell people this for startups is that you have to be able to fall asleep knowing there's like 10 fires going on and still be able to get some sleep.
Absolutely agree. And I think if you look at the people that are entrepreneurs and stay entrepreneurs, they're also willing to, go all in again and again. And that's what I find so fascinating about US entrepreneurship and so admirable is that in Europe, I have, in my cohort, let's say, people that graduated business school or whatnot in 2010 or 2008, there were a lot of people that, already had their first exits, 5 years ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And the European ones that made, let's say, 200-300 million, they retired. And when I look at it, I think, what a waste of talent, what a waste of energy, what a waste of time. And the US ones, they're all back at it. They're like, okay, thank you, next. And so you can see the difference. And I think the spirit of basically kind of going all in again after you've reached a certain level, that's what's built this amazing innovation and systematic innovation ecosystem that the US has, which is completely out dominating everything else in the world in healthcare, in consumer, in military, of course, in defense, everywhere else. And that is driven by this mentality of taking, on the one hand, risk, seen it as something positive, as the flip side of opportunity that you have to do and have to move. And then also just, staying hungry throughout without thinking about money first. And I think Steve Jobs and a lot of other people, they never really thought about the money. I mean, of course, it's important because it gives you leverage and gives you ability to invest and build and be faster and be more agile. But it's not primarily about the ranking or the status of the hierarchy of who's first in the list. It's more really about, the impact and the scale that you can get to. And that's a difference. Very interesting observation that I felt like a lot of people here in the continent, and I still live in Europe. I'm in the UK, kind of in between in a way, but that a lot of people say after, they've kind of made enough money to live comfortably and do everything they want, they just stop doing and they then try to become investor, entrepreneur, builder, something amorphous, and usually also quite successful because, of course, they're smart, they are working and so on. But the satisfaction level that they exuded when I met them when they were entrepreneurs and now is completely different. They're not happy. They are missing something, and they can go on as many, safaris and as many things as they want to. It's very clear that what they originally were looking for and what they really loved about it, which is, this kind of building something, being needed, being in the space and out of the comfort zone all the time. That is, I think, that is a skill to acquire, to deal with. And then to your point about the managers, I do think there are very, very good managers that not necessarily are entrepreneurs. And those are the managers that act with the same level of, let's say, ownership. And there was a very interesting discussion around this, founder mode article. I don't know if you've heard.
The one that Paul Graham wrote. Yes.
Yeah.
That's the new buzzword this quarter is founder mode.
Exactly, the founder mode buzzword. And I don't know who said it, but I think it was Mark Andreessen or somebody else said, well, we've talked about founder mode for like 20 years, but Satya Nadella is not a founder, but he's in founder mode.
That's a great example. He's absolutely in founder mode because look at what he did in Microsoft was swirling the bottom of the toilet 10 years ago, and he made a major. That's the first time someone pointed that out. I agree. That's such a good example. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's really about taking this like as a personal ownership responsibility and being at the forefront of driving change. And as a founder, you have a more natural advantage in terms of projecting that because yes, it's your baby, you founded it. But I think that's, these executives, they really put themselves out there and they do changes and they do big, bold moves. And that's what people like to see and follow. And then they get the same impact factor, let's say, than a founder mode. So I think, being a founder and CEO, or in my case, we are two founders, but let's say being a founder and responsible for the business, you just have to realize that you're responsible for everything. And that is what I think, what is founder mode? Founder mode is you're responsible for everything. And then, of course, once the company matures, some people come in that come more from the private equity, let's say structured, non-tech sectors. And let's say, okay, you build an organization and this guy is responsible here and this guy there, and you have to find more experienced people. And of course, they're more experienced and they have, 20 years and they're better and smarter and maybe have a higher IQ and a higher EQ than the founder or me or whomever is in charge. But they will never feel the same holistic responsibility for the business. And that then leads inevitably to problems if you, as a founder or as a CEO, give them complete autonomy and don't look what's going on, which is what the board oftentimes tells founders to do. Just leave them alone, let them do their thing. And I think that there are people in our organization at Caresytnax who I completely trust. And I just know they will come if they have a problem. And I don't, they're reporting it to me, but I don't need to have a weekly check-in with them. Of course, it's in the calendar, but I don't, it's not necessary because they have over 2 years, 3 years, 4 years shown that they have this, inner sense of responsibility and wanting to solve issues. And they bring back, let's say, the contracts or the results or the products that they're working on independently. And that is, I think, what is kind of necessary to build a high-performing team and organization is to really bring in those people that have this sense of ownership and that can get into founder mode, quote unquote, to stay with this word in any level of the organization. It doesn't really matter where you are. You can be in founder mode. It just means you're responsible for everything that is in your sight. And if you're a salesperson and something is in product, or if you're in product and something is in sales or in IT admin or wherever, the roof is on fire or there's a leakage in the basement, it doesn't really matter. You raise your hand or you try to fix it, and that is founder mode.
I love it. Well, and you've been in founder mode for the last 11 years, especially the last few years with Caresytnax. Just to kind of give people a little bit of an overview. So again, like it's an AI-driven platform, but essentially kind of like how the surgical theater has become the central place for the hospital, it seems like Caresytnax is trying to be that central platform for the hospital within the surgery. So you have preoperative planning to optimize things. You have interoperative support, post-op safety, contract optimization. And so it seems like you guys are really becoming a web of data information to make surgery safer and also optimize it. And just for the audience who is listening, just a couple of stats that I found very fascinating. One is you guys have, are essentially managing a little over 3 million surgeries annually. And then most recently, as of 2023, a big achievement, which you don't see often from the AI data world in healthcare, which is, I won't mention the company's names, but there are a lot of companies who talk about AI and raise a lot of money around it, but they don't have any results to show. Caresytnax, on the other hand, in 2023 had an 8% increase in operating room case volumes and a 33% reduction in the length of stay. So knowing all this, how do you see the next few years for Caresytnax? What is the big mission for you guys? Because you guys raised $180 million round, Series C. It's speculated that you're going to do an IPO. BlackRock invested in you guys. Optum, which is United Healthcare's venture arm, invested in you guys. So there's a lot of great results, a lot of traction, a lot of momentum. What do the next few years look like for you?
I think the interesting observation that you just made is it's kind of building the next generation of surgery, which will be less centered around a physical location and more, kind of a digital therapeutic workflow. So it's actually, surgery is therapy, and whether you administer a drug or, whether you do a physical intervention, is not too dissimilar. And because of the emergence of ASCs and more, different care settings along the pathway of the therapy, be it in oncology and neurology and cardiology, orthopedics and so on, the digital glue and the digital workflows become more and more important to deliver high quality and high efficiency of care. And I think that is really what's driving these results and what's also making it extremely necessary to have a platform or multiple platforms. I don't think that it will be the one and only platform here in this space, but that really provides a single source of truth about the patient's history, the environmental factors, the prior interventions, and the preconditions and so on, that also factor in the site of care, the team, the surgeon experience, the device, and so on, to make these optimal precision surgery or personalized surgery decisions. And that is what very, very quickly, once you implement it, creates a lot of value, mainly for the care team, because at this moment, they are waking up in the morning, them being the surgeons or the nurses, and they do not have a copilot or a companion app really that helps them clinically to, prepare for the case and then make sure that all the data has been collected and the scheduling's been done correctly and so on and so forth. There's a lot of manual steps here, a lot of, gut feel experience coming in terms of choosing which device to use, how to treat the patient. Many patients just go to, one specialist and then go for surgery. And there is so much data out there that can be utilized to make these choices of site of care, type of device, really tailored to the patient today. And that's why the impact factor is so high. So once you start looking into just analyzing systematically the patient and their environment, and mapping that to what we're about to do, in terms of therapeutic intervention, let's say a hernia surgery or a knee surgery, then you really understand that there are a lot of variables that are traditionally not captured or maybe invisible to the care team and the surgeon, that play an extremely high, let's say, role, or that have a high impact, let's say, on the patient satisfaction with the results and the functional outcome. And we can control for these factors and identify these higher risk patients or lower risk patients. And then we can make sure that get optimal care during the surgery, which is very, very important, of course. But the highest impact factors actually are also post-surgical related interventions. Let's say there's a high-risk patient coming out, we hyper care for that. The best hospitals in the world, of which there are some, in the US, some in Europe, they have that implemented manually. So they just have enough people to, call the patient up to make these analysis. And you can see from the data that HSS and other institutions have, they are, very well organized along the entire pathway from before, during, after, and they're doing most of the things that Caresytnax does. But that is just one hospital of thousands of hospitals around the world, and every surgery in that hospital costs $100,000. So I'm exaggerating a little bit, but that is not at all what is affordable to the system and what is scalable. And so I think we're taking these best practices, let's say, and we're utilizing them. And then you have these, as you mentioned, results in terms of more throughput, better allocation of resources, reduction of stay, reductions of opioid use, post-surgery. Very importantly, making everyone more profitable. So I think one of the key elements here is you have to make the provider, the surgeon, more money per case. Otherwise, it's not sustainable. So you can't only talk about we're the greatest, the patient impact, the outcome. No, it has to make more margin, and then it gets adopted. And it also has to make more margin for the insurance, for the payer, for the employer, whomever is, sending the patient there. And it has to be useful to the MedTech as well, in terms of its data output and, in terms of improving their own devices, their own marketing, and so on. So that was what's so difficult to do, is to cater to these different constituents of the transaction, which is a multi-trillion-dollar transaction worldwide. So it's a very large transaction that is happening in the room, but to really identify what are the data needs today, what can we do today incrementally to make all of those people's lives better, and then kind of grow with the utilization of the platform. And that's a very difficult, of course, ecosystem to play in. And there's a lot of different large financial interests involved here that may see this as a threat, but it actually, if done correctly, will make most players that are in the system from a provider side more profitable, which I think they deserve. I think the hospitals deserve to be more profitable. The surgeons deserve to make more money because they're the ones that are carrying the risk, the workload, and so on. I think surgeons should make a lot of money because they save lives. I also think that the insurance and the payers deserve to have better data and understand what is the quality of care they're getting and where to optimally allocate the patients. And then there's so many medtech companies out there that have great devices that are not used today because they don't have effective sales tools and sales force. And while it may not be, the hernia mesh for all of the patients, that's the best that this specific company makes, or the knee, or, you name it, the stent. But a lot of these devices are made for a specific subpopulation in which they have dramatically better outcomes. And we can show that with data. And from one day to another, by deploying that mesh, you have less complications, you have less reoperations, profit margins go up, throughput is better, patient outcomes are better. And so that's a long-winded way of saying that data helps at every step to make the system more efficient, more profitable, more sustainable.
No, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned that last part, which is the problem, I think, especially with AI and software, is one, is expensive, but two is that making sure that this makes sense and has an economic story to the hospital. One thing that actually stood out to me for Caresytnax was that it seems, and correct me if I'm wrong, that a big part of your growth strategy is this ability to expand into insurance underwriting and medtech clinical outcome analysis, because that just enhances the use of this data. I think that a lot of companies, they have data for the sake of data and want to hand it to the hospital, and the hospital doesn't know what to do with it. But you guys are translating that into this extremely tangible vehicle for both the payers and the insurance companies. Would you agree that that's a part of your growth strategy and adoption?
I think it's the core. It's basically, and it was one of these, let's say, entrepreneurial moments in which we had raised a Series C just in the beginning of the pandemic. And of course, during the pandemic, selling into hospitals or scaling into hospitals, tough times, near impossible, and also almost like irresponsible because they had other things to deal with. So we had to pivot, and we were lucky to find a few partners, interestingly, and more so in Europe, reinsurance companies and insurance companies that were very long-term thinking people. And those people that I spoke to back then said, we understand the risk curve and that it will change, and we're dealing in a currency that is a risk, which is insurance. And we know that surgical risk will change, and we're happy to invest into Caresytnax on the one hand, but also to scale your solution into our client base. And those were, reinsurance and liability insurance companies. So really the ones that are carrying the catastrophic risk of some medical malpractice claim, or something really going wrong during surgery, which happens, obviously because it happens everywhere. Humans are involved. It's normal. And but these groups are very long-term thinkers, and they invested and they helped us scale and showed us really the path to data monetization in a completely different way. And so our data is used in underwriting and understanding of risk profiles for hospitals and for surgeons and for even devices by now. I would say it's still not fully all automated and integrated, but it's pretty close to it. And it is a global innovation. Nobody else sells software together with an insurance package into an operating room in the world. It's only Caresytnax. And that was one. And then the second step, which came naturally out of this, was that the medtechs we were working with at the same time, also during COVID, who had, also lower surgical volumes and were thinking about the next generation, they said, well, why don't we create these devices in a way that we can offer performance guarantees, and by tracking end-to-end the results and all the inputs, all the outputs, we can go to a hospital and sell our new robotic system for TKA, or let's say for spine, or for bariatric bypass surgery or whatnot, with the guarantee that the patient's prompts will be better than beforehand. And if not, then we'll pay for it. And that, of course, if you scale it up, needs insurance as well. So, the medtechs that are now taking on the risk on the balance sheet for the outcomes, more and more so, they are then looking to data and into insurance. So it was a natural segue into that place, into us, which then opened the door into understanding that the actual development of these devices and of these surgical pathways takes so long that it's almost, it's unbelievable. But to develop an app, medical grade app, and to get it into a hand of surgeon takes 4 to 5 years. Literally an app that you could program in a month, just because of the cycle of, getting it tested, approved, FDA, NED, MER, convincing the salespeople to sell it, convincing the surgeons, etc., etc. The cycle is so long, and we have to disrupt the cycle and be much quicker in terms of putting these digital tools into the hands of the surgeons. And I think that was something that the pandemic did, and to catalyze the thinking around the table, not only in our heads and minds, but also around other decision makers that had similar positive or negative impacts in terms of the financial position and ability to market devices. So I think it's an absolute core of our strategy. And as you rightly said, the hospitals are sitting on all this data, and we're giving them for the first time the opportunity to monetize it themselves by making themselves more profitable, more efficient, but also towards third parties. And that really gives much more power back to the provider, and much more of the profit pool back to the provider, which I think is something that I'd love to see.
Yeah, it's the same with me. And I think it's an exciting time to be in medicine specifically, just because if you look at some of the largest companies on planet Earth, Apple, Microsoft, they all have a fiduciary responsibility to grow. They're not going to go start making furniture. Healthcare is kind of the last bit. So there's all this attention, capital, talent, and everything coming in. And so yeah, it's exciting to see that. Bjorn, I know you have to hop off, and we want to say thank you so much for joining us. So you're definitely going to be a repeat guest. I have one quick question for you. Okay, real quick, and I'll let you go. As an entrepreneur, continuing education is a big part of what we do and everything. What's one book that's had a big influence on your life? I know I made it tough. You got to jump, so you got to come up with
Checklist Manifesto, Arthur Gawande.
Nice.
Black box thinking as well. So, but Checklist Manifesto, absolute must read.
Fantastic. Bjorn, thank you so much for joining us. I will definitely have you back on the show. We'll hope you have a great evening over there, and we'll see you all next time. Bye for now. Thanks for checking out this episode. If you want to do me a big favor and join so many other people who have helped grow this podcast, take a second and look below. If you're on Apple, give us 5 stars and write a short review. If you're on Spotify, just give us 5 stars. And if you're on YouTube, hit the like button. And most importantly, if you can, subscribe. We release so many different episodes that you may miss. Be sure to subscribe and turn your notifications on. You get extra points with me if you subscribe across all 3 channels. Thank you so much. And if you felt like this episode helped you, send this to somebody who'd really enjoy and appreciate it. Share and spread the love. We'll see you all next time.